Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. Senior political correspondent for the Daily Express, it's Christian Calgie. I've got political commentator Suzanne Evans and former Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Suzanne, how seriously should we be taking the idea of sectarian politics?
Not at all. I mean, I think we should take it seriously. I feel really quite alarmed that we have this sectarianism in politics. I think Nigel Farage is absolutely right in what he said. I also think this is actually treating the Muslim community quite badly. It's not one cohesive whole. Not everybody's going to vote the same way. How dare they suggest that they should? I had a look at the candidates that they're endorsing. Interestingly, of course, there's not a single Conservative among them. Most of them are independents who are very pro-Gaza, who want a ceasefire. Their manifesto for change involves things like allowing Muslim prayers in schools. It absolutely calls for an end to selling arms to Israel. There's no doubt that the Muslim vote is not an organisation that is going to unify all Muslims, which isn't possible anyway. It's actually a hard left. Organisation.
Well, just on that, Matthew, I ran through the way that certain parties appear to be dealing with this right now. Should it be a concern to people that the Labour Party appears to want to throw their arms around them?
Well, I don't think the Labour Party's throwing its arms around this campaign. As Suzanne's just said, this campaign's endorsed a whole series of candidates who are standing against the Labour Party. I mean, in terms of, no community in the country should be taken as a block vote that can be moved from party to party. Votes are about individuals who come from different communities and have different interests. But, lots of organisations put out, voter checklists. I was just reading in the Green Room, here's one from Friends of the Earth about the environment. So that's reasonable. But the idea that Labour is giving into...
Well, what about Angela Rayner sitting in, that back room there, surrounded by a load of Muslim blokes making a load of promises about Palestine?
Well, what she said, and we heard her say there, was that if she resigned as an MP and it would bring about a ceasefire, she would do it. But it won't, so she isn't.
Palestinian state as well.
Well, the government believes in a Palestinian state. Everybody believes in a two-state solution. We want there to be a viable Palestinian state alongside a strong and secure Israel.
The Conservatives are trying to sweep this under the carpet a little bit at the moment, I think, aren't they, Christine, and not get involved and maybe leave Labour to what could be perceived as its own mess?
Well, I mean, in terms of target voters for the Conservatives at this election, I would suggest that muslimvote.co.uk is pretty low down on the list, along with, I suppose, sort of communists.
Anybody under 65, maybe.
Under 65. But, I think we can sort of sleep slightly easier because this doesn't look like it's going to be a marginal election. But what we did see in the Rochdale by-election, and the problem going forwards, is usually these niche, slightly extremist groups are very disparate, but in this country, demographically, they're very concentrated pockets. So there's certainly an issue to deal with going forward. Now, obviously, they shouldn't be dealt with by appeasing them, because if you look at what else they're calling for, you've said prayers in schools, there's something about Sharia pensions. There's also, from my perspective, something very concerning about wants to reform what the media can and can't say, especially the newspapers, and reform those laws. And I'd also be very interested to know their issues on some social views, because I imagine they're not especially liberal. So the way to deal with it is a more general thing, because let's be honest, extremism is not confined to young Muslims, even though that is a concern. Young men are becoming more right-wing and all sorts. So the way to deal with it is to reduce poverty, education, integration, those sort of issues.
I mean, the Green Party literally have thrown their arms round them. And that was one of the more astonishing things. And there will be all eyes on the Greens. We're having a discussion about them later on. They launched their campaign today. Bizarrely, they weren't that keen to talk about the environment. But there will be a lot of scrutiny over who some of the Green candidates may or may not be in light of the local elections. Nigel Farage has decided to try to tackle this head on, Suzanne. He's copped it a bit for it, but is he right?
Yeah, I think you have to tackle this head on, really. And I think it's something that's got to be brought into the public consciousness. I remember being told years ago that religion was irrelevant in our society. There was this great secular movement in the kind of 80s and 90s and thought people who were religious were nuts and nobody took them seriously. And I said, no, you're wrong. Religion is still a very, very powerful force in this country. And here we are now seeing it front and centre stage and integrated with our politics. And it's very worrying. And not just Muslims, but any kind of fundamentalist religion, because, as Nigel Farage hinted at there, most fundamentalist religions exclude gay people, exclude women, they exclude a lot of people who would find themselves in a very difficult position in society. I just don't think you can support that.
The concern would be, under a Labour government, Matthew, I suppose, by many people, that there would be an appeasement of these people, and that might have a massive, drastic influence on British politics going forward. Some people would look at certain fringe elements of muslimvote.co.uk or certain things like we saw with some of those Green candidates, for example, and think, I actually really wouldn't want those people anywhere near the party. Whereas the Labour Party, I think, has decided to try to win those people back, and I think many people find that a bit odd.
I think what Labour hasn't done is having a conversation with fundamentalists. I mean, you've seen a lot of people standing across the country against the Labour Party. The independent sort of pro-Gaza candidate almost cost Labour the crucial West Midlands mayoralty. So a lot of people are outside the Labour Party. But should Labour be talking to Muslim voters? Absolutely. Millions of Muslim voters across the country have legitimate concerns about a whole range of issues, of which Gaza is one. So conversations with the Muslim community, making our position on Gaza clear, which is perfectly sensible to call for an immediate ceasefire in light of what's happened over the last week, but no giving in to kind of block vote mentalities. Okay. Let's have individual dialogue with Muslim voters.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will understand that. I suppose the downside to it is there is currently a group called the muslimvote.co.uk, and they are choosing to treat the Muslim vote as a block vote and wanting to mobilise it en masse.
Against Labour and the Tories and the Dems.
Yeah. But I do worry, Christian, about where this ends. Are we witnessing the start of something irreversible in British politics here?
I don't think it's irreversible, and I think that, inevitably the war in Gaza will end and tensions will reduce. But I was just going to touch on a very important point here, and it's a really good example of why I'm so opposed to Keir Starmer's strategy of refusing to nail down his views on any topic. Because he's saying one thing to Jewish groups, one thing to Muslim groups. I don't know which side of the fence he'll come down on if and when he wins the election. And that is so concerning to me in democracy, is we should know what we're going to get from the
He's even distancing himself from the Diane Abbott thing. I mean, Jeremy Hunt made a comment, it was relatively rare that I take anything Jeremy Hunt so seriously, but he did make a comment which I thought was quite pithy, which was, if he can't deal with Diane Abbott, how's he going to deal with Putin?
Yeah.
And there is some sense there. You were furiously shaking your head, Matthew, as Christian was saying.
Yeah, because it's absolutely not true to say that Keir's saying one thing to one group. He's not the Lib Dems and he's not the Greens, who literally say one thing to one group of voters and another thing to another group of voters.
He's not really saying anything to anybody.
That's not true at all. I mean, he's been attacked.
Oh,
that's a big. That's a big. He doesn't. So what he's been very clear on is the stance on Gaza has been very clear. It has obviously evolved as the situation has evolved. It hasn't evolved to placate any voting group. It's evolved because of what he's done is right. And of course, it cost Labour the Rochdale by-election.
Hang on a minute.
And he's prepared to lose a by-election to do what's right.
I do wonder, Suzanne, if there's something to be said for the idea that the Labour Party actually took the quotes-unquote Muslim vote for granted, if anything, encouraged it for decades, and now it's turned against them. They're in a squishy position.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. I think that's very true. And also, we had scenes in Parliament just a couple of months ago over the Gaza ceasefire about the motion that the SNP put forward, that Labour was kind of forced into a corner over that, really. So I don't think it's true to say they're not trying to appease the Muslim vote. I personally think they still are.
OK, and Christian, you were alluding to this a little bit earlier on. So let's just say that the Tories have written this off. OK, fine. It could be argued they've also decided to write off quite a few of the young people. It could also be argued, if the latest polls are anything to go by, that they've actually managed to write off everybody under the age of 50. And then they also seem to be going after Keir Starmer for his age. He's 61, by the way, which is an odd tactic if your only demographic left is older people.
We can't have a pensioners Prime Minister, but pensioners are the only people who vote for us.
Who have the Tories got left?
America, then.
Well, they've got the presumably the great readers of the Daily Express and some of the other reputable papers.
Yes.
And I think so much of the Tory vote this year is going to be an anti-Starmer, anti-Labour vote, as so much of this Labour vote is not an enthusiastic endorsement of Keir Starmer. It's a rejection of the Conservatives, which I think makes this election particularly depressing.
I actually think as this election goes on, and particularly like we're seeing Labour starting to sort of implode now, I think a lot of disaffected voters might think, look, I'm really, really angry with the Tories. I don't want to vote for them, but I can't vote for that. I think it might be closer than we all think.
You think it might be closer than we all think? I think there is a serious concern going into this election with that backdrop of Gaza, with the issue that's going on over there, and with the increased and, well, hopefully, as far as they're concerned anyway, the more united aspects of certain cultural elements in this country, focusing here on the muslimvote.co.uk, that is actually going to have a big impact because they're very difficult to poll, Matthew, you can't really poll.
It's hard to poll. It's hard to poll.
Where they are going to actually land.
I think we should put this in context. Let's remember it wasn't that long ago that the Catholic priests used to tell their congregations how to vote after Mass on a Sunday. Very recently, that was a massive thing in Irish politics for a long time. Lots of campaign groups do that. We need to listen to individual voters and never be led by groups self-appointed who say they speak for any particular bloc.
OK.